Many elders pass down heirlooms to the next generation, often priceless and unique pieces, while others carry immense sentimental value. However, not everything passed down is a physical object. In some cases, as in the story we'll explore, what gets passed down isn't an object at all, but a presence that follows a family through generations. So, sit back, turn down the lights, and dive in to this unsettling true story. Anne's grandparents were firm believers that their house was haunted. She admits that her grandpa had a knack for telling tales, most of which were exaggerated to make them more interesting. So for most of her childhood, her grandpa's ghostly stories were just fun, not scary. It wasn't until she was nearing her teens that she realized several of those stories weren't exaggerated at all. And the stories she knew about her grandparents' home were less about the house being haunted and more about a haunted family. In the 1960s, Anne's grandparents lived in a house near the river. The family of 5 included her grandparents, her 2 uncles, her mother, and various pets they had over the years. The haunting from the old man that his grandpa was so fond of telling actually began in what we'll call the river house. Now, the old man wasn't a relative as far as they knew. It was just a ghost. He would walk around on the stairs at night, knock items out of cupboards and off shelves, and make the living feel like they were being watched. One afternoon, our storyteller's grandpa had gotten home from work and went straight inside for a bath. No one was home, and no one was supposed to be home anytime soon. But as he settled into the tub, he heard the front door open and the distinct sound of boots on the old wooden floors. He hadn't locked the front door, and the bathroom didn't have a lock. They lived in the country, so whoever was there must have been a friend or neighbor, or so Grandpa thought. He called out, "I'm in the tub, be out in a minute," but the steps moved closer toward the bathroom. "Hey," he shouted and laughed, "don't come in here. I'll be out in a minute." Still the steps got closer. Now Grandpa was mad. He jumped out, wrapped up in a towel, and grabbed the pistol that he always had close by just in case, and threw the bathroom door open to find no one there. Dusty boot prints led from the wide open front door and stopped at the bathroom door, but no prints led away, and there had been no time for anyone to have left. Anne supposes it was those boot prints that made her grandpa believe the ghost was a man. No one had actually seen an apparition until Anne's mom, who was still a young girl at the time, finally did. She told Anne that she always felt like she was being watched in the house. In the late 60s and early 70s, she and her brothers would take the bus home from school, get dropped off at the end of the road, then walk the rest of the way home. Both her parents would still be at work, so the kids would stay outside and play or hang out inside until their folks got home. Anne's mom was terrified to be in River House alone. So if the boys took off without her, she would sit on the porch between the windows so whoever or whatever was inside the house wouldn't be watching her. In the present, it was far more frightening for our storyteller to think of a little girl sitting alone out in the open than to consider a creepy ghost. But she has always been more afraid of flesh and blood creeps than she is of anything otherworldly. Often Anne's mom and her uncles would stay after school for practice or other activities, then catch a ride home with a friend. One Friday evening, when her mom was about 10, she had a friend come home with her to spend the night. The friend's mother dropped the girls off at River House. The girls made their way toward the house when Anne's mom saw one of her brothers peek out through a window and then duck down quickly. She knew they must be planning to scare the 2 of them, and she wanted to turn the tables. So they walked quietly up to the front door, paused, then swung the door open with a yell. To their surprise, the boys weren't hiding at the window. So the girls called out and began looking for them. It had only been a moment when she turned and saw her brothers walking over the hill toward their house. They had just gotten dropped off from football practice and had not been in the house at all. That, of course, cemented in her mind that there was something to be afraid of in that house. It wasn't just the noises anymore, but something she could see, something that was intelligent enough to hide. Needless to say, she was happy when, a few years later, the family decided to move. As seems to be the case in some haunting experiences, the old man did not stay at River House. He made his presence very clearly known at the new house. They didn't have stairs in their new place, but they had an attic with a pull-down ladder. That's where he decided to reside. The same old footsteps, knocking and banging they heard at River House continued, but it didn't really bother anyone. The kids grew up and their fears turned more to annoyance. One by one, each got married and moved out. And as life would have it, our storyteller's parents moved in next door to her grandparents. The early 80s, the grandkids, including Anne, began to debut. A new generation would have experiences with the old man. So now, we turn our attention to the beginning of Anne's own encounters with the paranormal. When you live in the South after a long summer, you welcome the cooler weather that comes with fall. For our writer, it was her favorite time of year. Halloween was and still is one of her favorite holidays. Her birthday is only a few days before Halloween, which added to her excitement. Growing up, she would have birthday parties at her grandfolks' house. There was more room for her friends, but the biggest advantage was all the spooky stories her grandparents would tell. Most of the time, she would leave the storytelling to one of them because she enjoyed hearing the stories as much as any of her friends did. But that changed on her 12th birthday. That year, the adults decided she was old enough to have a big sleepover. She invited 6 girls from her grade to stay. The party would be in the den of her grandparents' house, but the most exciting part for her was they were going to be there alone until 10 p.m. Her grandparents were going to stay out for the evening, and her parents were going to be next door with a clear view of the house. All the doors and windows were locked and secured. There was no reason to be afraid of any dangerous situations popping up. She was ready to make this sleepover as spooky as possible. A couple of Anne's friends came home with her on the bus that afternoon. While they waited for the other guests, she gave the 2 girls a tour of her grandparents' house. They would be staying downstairs in the den. She showed them around the main level of the house, the living room, kitchen, bedrooms, bathroom, and the room Anne calls the hub. Each of the 4 walls had doorways to the other rooms. That wasn't the original design, but the house ended up that way after her grandparents renovated. To get anywhere from the den, you had to go through the hub. It just so happened the attic was also accessed there. She told the 2 girls a couple of stories about the old man in the attic and successfully spooked them. She was excited for nightfall and the opportunity to really scare her guests. As they walked toward the outside to greet the rest of their arriving friends, one of the girls stopped under the attic with a wide-eyed, fearful expression. "What's wrong?" our writer asked. "I heard something moving in the attic. It may have been footsteps," her friend said. Anne rolled her eyes and told her friend there was nothing up there. No one could get into the attic without using the pull-down ladder. It wasn't stable enough for someone to just be walking around up there. But Anne's ghost stories already had her friend spooked, so much that she thought the girl might want to go home. So she pulled the string, opened the attic door, and reassured her friend that the stories were just that, stories. Anne's friend calmed down, and they welcomed the rest of the guests as they arrived. They had pizza and cake, all the junk food you would have at a sleepover. Her mom and younger sister stayed with them for about an hour. As the sun began to set, they all moved from the front yard to the den, where the group of girls would spend the night. Along with her mom, Anne checked that the doors upstairs were locked. There were two doors in the den, one leading to the front yard and the other leading to the back, where her grandparents parked their vehicles. She checked the den's back door and locked the front door behind her mom as she left. She was instructed not to open the door for anyone. Her grandparents had a key for the den's back door and would let themselves in when they got home. The party went on and the girls stayed up late, eventually crashing on the floor in their sleeping bags. Overall, the party was a success, but that was the last time she had a spooky sleepover there. From that night forward, she couldn't shake the eeriness she felt when she was there, especially alone. Anne had almost convinced herself that the experiences they had that night were just their overactive imaginations until a few months later. The doctor found a tumor on her grandma's brain stem. Thankfully, it wasn't cancer, but it had to be removed. Grandma spent some of her recovery in the hospital, but after a week or so, she was released to finish recovery at home. She needed round-the-clock care for a while. Grandpa was still working at the time. When he was gone, Anne's mom would take care of her grandma. Then, when Anne came home from school, she would take her mom's place and wait for her grandpa to come home. She would only have to be there for about 2 hours each afternoon. Her job was easy. Her grandma slept most of the time. She would do her homework, have a snack, and watch TV. If her grandpa brought groceries home or something, she would help put them away. Sometimes she'd help make dinner. Then she'd go home. She wasn't crazy about being there alone with her grandma, in part because she was afraid her grandma would need something and Anne wouldn't be able to help. She knew what her grandma had been through was serious, and she was nervous something bad might happen. But the other reason was the creepy feeling she had being in the house. Usually having an adult there was enough, but not when that adult was in her grandma's condition. Every day, she would tell herself there was nothing to be afraid of, that the stories were just stories, and the experiences at the party were just overactive imagination. When the feelings got too intense, she'd just turn the TV up a little louder and drown out any sounds that could possibly scare her. Being there became routine after a couple of weeks, and one particular Friday afternoon started with no exception. She had settled in with a snack and was watching TV when she heard the storm door outside the den's back door open. She looked up as the lock turned, and then the door opened, but only an inch or so. Her 12-year-old brain was trying to piece this together. She hadn't heard her grandpa's truck pull up. It was still early for him to be home, but she thought maybe he had gotten out early. He must have gotten groceries, unlocked and opened the door, then gone back for the bags. That was logical. So she walked over to the door and planned to help him bring groceries inside. But he wasn't there. There was no truck. No one around anywhere. Her grandpa was the only one with a key to that door. How could the locked door have opened on its own? She was honestly too stunned to be afraid. It just didn't make sense. She closed the door, locked it, and double-checked that it was locked. Then she sat back down, completely confused. Now she can't say it was the old man from the attic, but she can't explain what happened that day. She was much older before she told anyone else that story. Until that moment, she could explain things away. She felt this story made her sound like a liar, or like she was crazy. So she kept quiet. There was something going on in that house, but she wasn't sure she could say it was a ghost. All she knew for sure was that she would never brush off another person's experience as, quote, just their imagination again. Around 2005, and not long after Anne's great-grandmother passed away in the home, her grandparents decided to buy property further out in the country and build a new house there. The entire family, including her parents, planned to move to the same area. Despite the promise of staying close to her loved ones, Anne wasn't exactly thrilled about leaving. Even with all the strange things that happened there, she loved her grandfolks' house, filled with treasured memories of family and friends. Anne half joked about leaving the old man in the attic and her great-grandma's ghost behind. The house was put up for sale, but finding a buyer was difficult, so her grandparents decided to rent it out instead. This gave Anne hope that one day she might rent or even buy the property herself. Helping her grandparents pack and move felt strange. Trying to pack up so many years of memories was quite a task. In the back of her mind, she expected the spirits in the house to make their presence known one last time. Only one simple thing happened. The large dresser where her great-grandma had once kept her things tipped over, seemingly by itself, and scattered its contents on the ground. It was seen as a strange but funny coincidence. Soon, renters moved in. Naturally, our writer was curious if they had any strange experiences, but never got the chance to ask. Over a 3-year period, 2 different families moved in and then out of the house. After the second family left, Anne visited the house and found it in a sorry state. The once loved home was almost destroyed inside. During this period, Anne also met and married her husband. The newlyweds lived with her parents while they looked for a place of their own. They struggled financially during the recession, with both her parents losing their jobs and her husband finding work difficult to come by. Eventually, her parents lost their new home, forcing another move. Learning that her grandparents' house was empty, the young couple asked if they could rent the place. The grandparents agreed, though it wasn't necessarily the best arrangement. Moving in felt like a step in the right direction. Her parents helped them clean and move in their belongings. One day, as she was putting away dishes in the kitchen, her mom called out for her to unlock the front door. Anne's dad and husband left to get another load of boxes and had now seemingly returned. So Anne quickly ran to unlock and open the door, but no one was there. Her mom insisted she had seen a man in a white shirt walk past the window, but no one was around. It was unsettling, but she tried to laugh it off. After the unpacking was done, a dark presence became evident almost immediately in the home. The house was infested with spiders and mice, and everything seemed to break or inexplicably malfunction. I suppose the same could be said for many older homes, but this felt like more. The air was always heavy. At night, the darkness was thick, but the most worrisome issue was that the young wife's health began to decline rapidly, making even basic chores difficult. There were days when she was unable to stay awake for more than a few moments. Her husband, despite having to work long hours, had to take care of her. Anne began to feel hopeless and spiraled into a deep depression. Although, to her husband's credit, he remained strong for her and did all he could to comfort his bride. The oppressive feelings escalated when she was alone in the house. The feeling of being watched intensified, and spiders and insects appeared in droves. She started to believe that there was a truly evil presence in the house. It certainly wasn't just a benign spirit her family had often joked about. After arriving at this realization, the couple decided to face it with prayer, believing in the power of faith in Christ. One night, feeling slightly stronger and more determined, she tackled some housework despite the palpable, oppressive atmosphere. The feeling grew ever darker, culminating in a sense that a heavy, angry presence was standing against her back. Now, more angry than afraid, she walked to the hub and shouted, "In the name of Jesus Christ, leave my house. You are not welcome here." And as though it had been ripped away, the oppressive feeling vanished, replaced by overwhelming calm. For about a month, there were no encounters or heaviness in the home. One afternoon, she worked at her computer making an audio recording for church. The annual Christmas play was coming up, and she was in charge of helping the youngest children with learning their lines and song. Anne recorded herself quoting a scripture, and upon playing it back, found she captured the voice of a man speaking in a low growl in the background of her recording. It wasn't clear enough to make out the words, and she wasn't going to mess around. She deleted the file, fearing it was an invitation for the spirits to return. She prayed for protection immediately. After the fear she had experienced in the house weeks prior, she wanted nothing else to do with anything paranormal in that house. After Christmas, and with the house still being a financial burden on the family, Anne's grandparents decided to list the house again. The young couple moved out at the end of January, but not before one last spooky encounter. Anne's husband woke her late one night, claiming to have seen the glowing figure of a spectral woman walk out of the kitchen and disappear into the hallway. They believed it was a final attempt to instill fear before they left, and that short but scarring chapter of their lives was closed. The house was sold several months later. Neither Anne nor any of her family ever met the new owners. They have all wondered if the new folks experienced anything but didn't want to reopen that door. The strange experiences with the paranormal didn't end there, but the writer and her family have learned not to be afraid. They believe in the power of their faith, and when tested by otherworldly phenomena, try to ignore that activity, believing the entities feed on fear. They still share the stories passed down for generations, but now with this caution: you never know who or what you're dealing with from the other side. Maybe it's best to just leave them alone.